This video is going to go over Chapter 18, Blood, Objective 2. Objective 2 is identify the most important proteins and other solutes present in blood plasma. So this right here, this chart is going to be visible in your packet that you have, and it looks pretty intimidating. But if you kind of just slow down and take a look at it, it really is a good chart. So you can see right here, you've got blood. And the two main parts, we're not going to worry too much about the white blood cells and platelets too much, because keep in mind those make up less than 1%. But if you look at the formed elements, just all of them together, remember that's pretty much the red blood cells. That's 45%. And then your plasma is 55%. We learned this in the previous objective. Now, if you take a look at the formed elements, you can see your platelets of those formed elements, red blood cells and white blood cells. And just to kind of make a note here, if you were looking at the amount of formed elements in blood, you can see you have the majority of it is going to be your red blood cells. Next is actually going to be your platelets. And then last are your white blood cells. So in order of greatest to least, you have red blood cells with the most amount of cells, platelets with the second highest amount, and then white blood cells with the least as far as what makes up your formed elements. So pretty interesting. And then your white blood cells, remember we said never let monkeys eat bananas. So never neutrophils, let lymphocytes, monkeys monocytes, eat eosinophils, bananas basophils. So I know those aren't in the greatest to least, but you can look at the percentages there and see those. And those are your white blood cells and their concentration in blood. Now, let's take a look at the plasma over here. What kind of things are you going to have dissolved in plasma? Well, you're going to have electrolytes. Remember, the majority of plasma is water. You have those proteins, those three special proteins that we talked about in the previous objective: albumins, globulins, and fibrinogens. You have waste products for sure. You have nutrients. Keep in mind, when we're talking about nutrients, we're talking about things like carbohydrates, amino acids, fats. Okay, you are also going to have vitamins and hormones, which are also types of nutrients floating throughout the blood, and then gases: nitrogen gas, oxygen gas, and carbon dioxide gas. So in blood plasma, like we said, this is just kind of taking that chart and breaking it down in words. So you've got 92% water, you've got 7% proteins. Now, these proteins could either be dissolved if they're water soluble or suspended if they are hydrophobic and don't like water. Albumin, this is the most abundant protein. It is made by the liver, so you do need to know where it's made from. And it's a binding protein. We talked about in the previous chapter, chapter 17, the endocrine system, that some of those hydrophobic hormones, such as your steroid hormones, they don't travel well through the blood. They need a protein to kind of help carry them along. Albumin is the name of that protein. It transports these fatty acids and steroids throughout the bloodstream. Globulins, this is the second most common protein. Again, two of the three also made by the liver. Alpha globulins are involved in transportation. Beta globulins also involved in transportation. But gamma globulins, these are actually antibodies. They're produced by white blood cells called plasma cells. We'll talk more about that in chapter 21. So these are not made by the liver. So that's a big key, right? So when I'm asking you questions on the test about where was something made, if you're really taking an honest to Pete guess, liver would be the best answer choice, except if I were to ask you about gamma globulins and where those get made. Those get made, again, by special types of white blood cells known as plasma cells. Gamma globulins are also known as antibodies or immunoglobulins. Fibrinogen is another type of protein found in blood plasma. This is the least abundant. Again, guess what? Produced by the liver. And fibrinogen is essential for blood clotting. Now, when you're dealing with clotting of blood, it is a cascade of events. It's not a kind of like a domino effect. It's not a, oh, this happens and your blood clots. It's this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And eventually, 10, 12 steps later, your blood clots. So, fibrinogen is one of those components in that cascade of events to help blood clotting. Now, platelets, that's a cell that aids in blood clotting, but that's separate. That's a different clotting system than this is. Um, Other solutes. Of course, there's other stuff present in blood plasma besides just water and proteins. You're going to have things like electrolytes. Remember, sodium ions, potassium ions, calcium ions. We talked about this in the nervous system, and they're found in blood plasma as well. Dissolved gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, nutrients, vitamins, lipids, glucose, amino acids, carbohydrates. We could put that on there too. I mean, that would be sugar, right? That'd be glucose, and waste products. So understand the composition of blood plasma. You also need to know what plasma is compared to what serum is, because I know that you've heard both of those words, but believe it or not, they're not the same. They are different. Plasma and serum represent a cell-free fraction of blood. What that means is there's no cells in plasma or serum. Remember, there's no white blood cells, there's no red blood cells, there's no platelets. So that's not present in either one of those. Serum is after all of the clotting mechanisms have been removed. So basically, after the fibrinogen is gone. So plasma contains everything. Serum is missing the fibrinogen. It's basically everything but fibrinogen. So again, that's really the only difference there. You don't have to know about the different tops. I just thought it was kind of cool if you're into, or if you've been a phlebotomist, that might make some sense. But anyway, the only thing you need to know is serum is missing fibrinogen, plasma has it. So, question set number 2 in your packet there. Let's take a look at number 1. I'll give you a second to answer that. Hopefully, you all know that the least abundant cellular component is white blood cells. Remember, in order of greatest to least, red blood cells were most prominent, then platelets, then white blood cells. Now, you may be saying, wait a minute, you said plasma, we got 55% plasma. Go back and read the question. It's asking for specifically the least in the cellular components, okay, which would be white blood cells. I'll give you a second to take a look at question set 2, numbers 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so globulins, remember there were alpha globulins, beta globulins, and gamma globulins. Alpha and beta made by the liver, involved in transportation. Gamma globulins made by special white blood cells, and so not made by the liver, and were involved, they're antibodies, okay? And then fibrinogen, that's involved in blood clotting, not present in serum, but present in plasma. And that concludes objective 2.